Hi, everybody. I'm Christy Craig. I'm the publisher here at Hidden Timber Books, and I want to welcome you today to another small press author reading event. I'm excited to have Colin Rafferty here to read and discuss his new book, Execute the Office, which is published by Baobab Press. And I think it's going to be a fun hour. So I just want to let you know a little bit about Hidden Timber Books. We're a very tiny press in Milwaukee, and we've been doing this series for a little over a year now, just to bring together authors and readers from all over. Most, in the beginning, it was by necessity, and now it's kind of just become a great way to build community, and it's fun to meet people like Colin who are far away, but yet we get to hear their work and talk with them about their work. So. Execute the Office builds upon factual accuracy with essays that are equally invested in lyrical writing and experimental forms. I had a chance to read one of the excerpts on the Rumpus, the Reagan Essay, and it's really cool. So take a look around. I'll put Colin's website and information where you can purchase his book to catch some other excerpts online and different things like that. So. A little bit about Colin. Colin Rafferty was born in Kansas City, Missouri, but grew up on the Kansas side. He went to land-grant universities and eventually got an MFA from the University of Alabama. He writes about monuments, Hallow This Ground, presidents and Execute the Office, and Vietnam, which he calls the difficult third book. He teaches nonfiction writing at the University of Mary Washington and lives in Richmond, Virginia. So thank you so much for giving up an hour on your Saturday today, Colin. I'm excited to talk with you about your book. And I'd love to hear a little bit about who you are as a writer, kind of how you came to write this book.
And thank you for having me here. This is really, it's wonderful. Thanks to the people who are here. And for anybody who's watching this on repeat or record. It is, I know this has been kind of, if I say I have a favorite part of the pandemic, that sounds weird, but one of the kind of really great side effects of the pandemic has been the way that readings have become much more accessible and much easier to get to. I mean, I think last week I had to choose between 3 different readings at the same time. And it was just this almost a kind of embarrassment of riches. So yeah, thank you so much for setting this up and asking me to be a part of it. The book really kind of came as a side effect of moving to Virginia. I got the job at Mary Washington in 2008, and which was a presidential election year. And I moved from Alabama, which was a state that was not in play, to Virginia, which was a state that was in play for the first time. And so suddenly, I was only I was very close to DC. And Obama and Biden came and spoke on my campus. Sarah Palin gave a speech in downtown, and there was all this history was around me as well. That I was, James Monroe's law office was not too far from my campus, and suddenly Mount Vernon and Monticello and all these other places were nearby. And I started thinking about the presidents initially just as I couldn't name all of them in order. And that seemed wrong. I guess this is the sort of part of me that was an Eagle Scout and student council president. And it just seemed wrong that I couldn't name all the presidents. And so I decided to learn all of them in the most complicated way possible, which was that I would read one biography of a president each month until the next election, which at that point was about 44 months away. And so by the 2012 election, I would have read a biography of each one. And so I did that. And like, there are some real kind of doorstop biographies in there. A 600-page biography of Franklin Pierce is nobody's idea of a good time, but I read it. And along the way, I was talking with a friend and mentioning the reading project, and he said, "Well, I hope you get a book out of it." I was like, "Well, I don't know. I just want to be able to name all the presidents in order. That does book, whatever." But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, this is a really kind of rich territory for material, that you have this kind of elevated person, 44 different elevated people at the time. And it seemed like a kind of chance to mess around with nonfiction, because a lot of the experimental nonfiction that I was reading at the time, or the lyric essays I was reading at the time, were memoir based. And I think it was this idea that people felt like they could, like it was okay to write kind of wild nonfiction as long as it was about yourself, right? As long as, like, if that was the stuff you were kind of playing around with, that was safe territory. And I thought, well, okay, well, what if I wrote nonfiction that was sort of lyric, but also completely fact checkable and not about me at all? And the presidents, there were enough of them that it felt like a kind of fertile space to explore. So it really kind of began from that. I wrote the first essay on William McKinley. That was the first one that just kind of, I figured out the way into it, and tried out another 4 after that. And after 4, I was like, yeah, this is fun and this is interesting. Like, let's keep doing it. And so eventually assembled a manuscript. I used my sabbatical semester from Mary Washington to kind of get a first draft done. After the 2016 election, I had kind of thought, oh, this, I know how this is going to wrap up, and like, we'll just sort of do this, and like, great, it'll all be done. And then after the 2016 election, that kind of necessitated a revisioning of the entire project. And then the more and more, and actually my editor at Baobab was fantastic at working with me on this. Like, it felt like trying to nail Jello to the wall, just finishing the book, and getting kind of everything in place, and writing, some essays to close out the book, to have it feel complete, even though lots was incomplete, like the things were still ongoing. So it was it kind of started in 2012 was when I wrote the first essay from it. And so it took about 9 years from that to publication.
That was one of my questions. If if you had to change things in the last minute before it was published, to just include a little more, and what that was like. So I guess you read all of those biographies. Did you have one that was more of your favorite, either because of the style or because of the person or facts or anything?
That's a great question. I read some, there in the world of presidential biographies, there are some kind of greatest hits biographies in a way, and they're almost always by David McCullough, right? So his Truman biography, which rehabilitated Truman's reputation, his John Adams biography, which did the same for him. Those were both just kind of fascinating and wonderful to read. I read, and I can't remember I think the author's last name is Brands, I might be wrong, but the Franklin Delano Roosevelt biography I read was called Traitor to His Class. And that was just a kind of fascinating, like, in just recognizing sort of how radical Roosevelt's presidency was on so many levels. I read a psychological biography of Bill Clinton. It's interesting, once you get kind of closer to the contemporary day, the biography starts shifting a little bit. But a psychological biography of Bill Clinton that was really fascinating. And then I think I mentioned it earlier, but Franklin Pierce's biography, as kind of, a bit as a slog as it was, like, Pierce turns out, because he is just the president who we just, we sort of recognize him as having been president, and that's about it. And his is just an absolutely tragic story. Death and alcoholism and deceit and intrigue, and he is easily our most pathos-laden president.
Wow. See, yeah, I wouldn't know that.
Who would? It's Franklin Pierce.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, do you want to read an excerpt for us?
Sure, that'd be great. I'm going to do one of the original forms that one of the essays took was that I wrote, in a way, the book was an excuse to just try out a lot of stuff. And so I was like, well, I want to make a graphic essay. I used to draw comic books when I was a kid, and I was not going to try to draw anything this time around because I have no or very little artistic ability, and maybe less so the motivation to just, make it all. But I did a graphic essay on James Monroe, the 5th president of the United States, and who is famously the last president that we don't have a photograph of, right? The first 5 presidents, we just have representations of them. And so I thought, well, there's something to that here. So I did the essay as a graphic essay, and it got picked up by a literary journal called Pinball, which was a great journal. And I was really excited that they published it, but they published it, and then the editor said, I'm going to take a break from this for a while. And then the website lapsed and it's sort of just vanished into the ether. And in the book itself, it's just a print essay now, because sort of recreating that was too much. I learned a fascinating amount about US copyright law, by the way, in making sure that every image that I used for it was in the public domain. But it was great. How often do you get to call up the Smithsonian or the Metropolitan Museum of Art and ask for permission to reproduce things. So, okay, so what I did for this is a kind of semi-graphic version of it. I'm going to attempt to share my screen without saying that. No, wait, I did it. Sorry. But here is, so I've put together a kind of semi-graphic version of this. So this is an essay called The Eye of James Monroe. Each essay in the book starts with the name of the president, their number, the years they were in office, and then their relationship to three different points of significance in the presidency, right? One is the ratification of the Constitution, which creates the office. One is the Emancipation Proclamation, which is maybe the greatest exercise of presidential power. And then the third is the resignation of Richard Nixon, right? The only time someone has resigned the office. So, the Eye of James Monroe. James Monroe, 5th President of the United States, 1817 to 1825, 30 years since the Constitution, 38 years until emancipation, 149 years until the resignation. In On Photography, Susan Sontag writes that photographs are a way of imprisoning reality. One can't possess reality, one can possess images. One can't possess the present, but one can possess the past. The idea of photography, using the sun to capture an image on a light-sensitive material, predates the United States, but only in the 1820s does a Frenchman named Nicéphore Nipies think to fix the image to the surface in order to preserve it for posterity. Even then, his process requires hours, even days to succeed, far too long for any human to sit for a portrait. In 1839, Nipies' associate Louis Daguerre announced that he had refined the process into the daguerreotype, the first public instance of the photograph. A picture would only take a few minutes to develop. The first two humans photographed are captured in a street scene, one standing still while the other shines his boots. Now we have a record of what people actually looked like. No longer is the burden of representation placed on a painter's interpretation of the sitter. None of this matters for James Monroe, 5th President of the United States, who died on the 4th of July 8 years earlier in 1831. Like the first 4 presidents, and unlike every president after him, the image of James Monroe was not captured in a photograph, only in paintings and engravings. When all we have is a painting, an interpretation, what, if anything, is the true image? Asked another way, how real must an image be before we accept it as authentic? John Vanderlyn's portrait of Monroe hangs in the Gallery of Presidents in the National Portrait Gallery in Washington. The painting isn't far from the famous Gilbert Stuart portrait of George Washington, and only a little bit farther away is, at the time of writing, the newest arrival, Kehinde Wiley's portrait of Barack Obama. People line up to take their picture with Wiley's Obama and stand far enough back to fit all of Stuart's Washington into the screen of their phone. Vanderlyn's Monroe watches from the side, his blue eyes gazing into the distance. His forehead is slightly furrowed, his chin prominently cleft. His visible sideburn seems to sweep back into his ear just a little, the hair shot through with silver strands. Not too far from the National Portrait Gallery, Samuel Morse's portrait of Monroe hangs in the White House's collection. Painted a few years after Vanderlyn's Monroe, also during Monroe's presidency, Morse's Monroe looks off to his left with eyes somewhere between blue and gray. Hair is uniformly dark, unrulier, and something about the shape of his head is different from Vanderlyn's Monroe. They don't look like the same person, except for the chin. In 1954, a government employee engraves a picture of James Monroe for a 5-cent stamp. This Monroe doesn't look like either Morse's or Vanderlyn's Monroes, except for the cleft chin. His hair seems to be entirely white and swept up, like a preview of Andrew Jackson's famous portrait. His eyes are blue, but that might be just because the entire stamp is printed with blue ink. 3 James Monroes. Already you can see that we are on tricky ground. We can say that we know James Monroe because we know the facts of his life. But a painting is only a collection of pigments carefully arranged on a surface. It's an interpretation. It's not James Monroe. It's a painting of James Monroe. And if a biography is similar, a collection of facts arranged on a page, can we ever fully know James Monroe, and by extension, anyone? James Monroe was born in 1758 in Westmoreland County, Virginia, on the estate next to the Washingtons. Today, no building remains. 18 years after his birth, in 1776, Monroe joins his former neighbor in crossing the Delaware to attack Hessian troops. He's the young man holding the flag in Emanuel Lewitz's Washington Crossing the Delaware, the famous painting of the scene. It hangs in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, occupying almost an entire wall. He's wounded in the attack, one of only a few presidents wounded in combat. Monroe encounters war again, 36 years on, as James Madison's Secretary of State. He follows Madison as president. Most secretaries of state did then. He was the last president to wear breeches instead of pants. None of the paintings show his breeches. His biggest accomplishment as president is the Monroe Doctrine, which you've probably heard of, which warns Europe to stay out of the Western Hemisphere's affairs. He writes it with his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, who, as you probably guessed, follows him in office. He dies in New York City on the 4th of July, 1831. In 1858, his body was moved to Richmond via steamship and a hearse drawn by 6 white horses and then buried in an ornate tomb. As far as I can tell, there are no photographs of this. Even almost 2 decades after Daguerre's announcement, a steamship and trotting horses would have been moving too fast for the light to capture them on the plate. Consider instead the first photo of a president, a photo of John Quincy Adams, Monroe's successor. This photo allows us to know, in a way that a painting does not, what Adams looked like with reasonable accuracy. We can confirm the white hair surrounding a bald head, the white sideburns. We can see the downturned corners of his mouth and his piercing gaze. We can see the gnarled fingers woven together, the black pants, even a glimpse of his socks. We can look at these things and know them for certain. We might feel that we possess John Quincy Adams and his socks more than we possess James Monroe. We know so little about the presidents. The oldest recording is of Benjamin Harrison, which means we don't know what half of them sounded like. Lincoln's voice was reputedly high-pitched. We have no idea what Jefferson sounded like, or Madison, or Grant. Not until almost the 20th century do we know what a president looks like in motion. Another 45 years, and they come into our homes via television. The first president to be photographed by a digital camera was Obama, which, like Carter being the first president born in a hospital, feels ridiculous to consider. Even the presidents we know in living color, sound, and motion, what do we really know about them? We know they are human, and therefore they seem familiar to us, perhaps even more so than our friends and families. Sometimes I feel like I know more about what the president is doing than I do about most of my extended family. But even the walking, talking, photographed person is still a creation put together by the images and sounds we take in. How real is this amalgamation? We have our ideas of the president, and then there is the president himself, human, and therefore complex beyond knowable. I'm not looking at the Eye of James Monroe. I'm looking at a painting of the Eye of James Monroe. You're reading a description of 2 paintings and an engraving of the Eye of James Monroe. In Lloyd's famous Washington crossing of Delaware, the light is wrong. The ice is wrong. The river is too wide. The people standing, including the future presidents, would have fallen into the river. Historically, Monroe wasn't even in the same boat as Washington. Any portrait, Vanderlyn's or Morse's or mine, is always incomplete and unfinished. There's no way to fit everything into the frame. Completion is a task as impossible as the stance Monroe has in a boat in which he never set foot. We cannot know what it was like to be him or to be any of them. What did his eye see? The ice of the Delaware pushed aside as the boat glided silently towards Trenton. The page on which he wrote the Monroe Doctrine slowly filling up with ink. His wife, Elizabeth, as First Lady, another public figure in their quiet moments alone. These moments are not ours to witness. We can imagine, we can try to understand, but we cannot see. It was never fixed upon the photographic plate. They are the mystery, the humanity, and since we have nothing to possess, no reality to imprison in the photograph, we must leave it to them. Yep.
That's awesome. I was wondering if you've thought about trying to get that graphic essay republished anywhere.
It seems like a worthwhile thing, right? Even if I just kind of do it as a small, like even if I just kind of do my old kind of DIY comic book styles and just make a limited run of it, that might be fun to get back out into the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was it made me think a little bit about your Reagan essay. There was a quote that I really love in there that you write, something unnerves me from the start. Maybe it's my parents' reaction to him. Maybe it's the perfect hair, the jar of jelly beans. Maybe it's the way he's always everywhere. I go to Catholic school where I learn about the omnipresence of God. Maybe it's that. And, your book is, from what I've read of it, is, it's hard for me to figure out if it's the ominous feel that's on top and the humor underneath, or vice versa, but they mix well together. And so what you just read is a perfect example of that. Like, whose version do you believe even when you see it with your own eyes, or even when you read it, you know, all of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's like maybe a kind of fascinating. I mean, you look at any president, the kind of discourse surrounding any president, and there is that fascinating way in which, you know, Joe Biden is either a doddering old fool or an absolutely evil mastermind who, you know, who is driving the United States. Or, I mean, the same things were said about Trump too, right? Like he's either a fool or an evil genius, or a super genius, right? Or very stable genius, right? That was the term. And so, yeah, it's always this kind of fascinating balancing act between like they're real people and, you know, therefore fallible, and then this sort of godlike position we put them into. Again, you know, reading a biography of each president is this way of seeing how the balance of power in the United States shifts from the legislative branch to the executive branch over the years, right? That it really is sort of senators and speakers of the House who are driving the government for a very long time, and then you see this sort of steady build of the executive growth, or steady growth of the executive power.
So, Michael, I see you have a question. Would you like to pop in, or would you rather just have it be read out loud?
Well, I'll just say, hi, Colin.
Hey.
Have you seen the new photograph of Biden and
yeah
and Carter?
And again, the very, or the Carters look like marionettes, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And the explanation is that to use a wide angle lens to kind of fit everybody in the frame, that there's this sort of strange distortion of perspective on it, which is, I mean, what a beautiful metaphor, right? Like,
yeah,
you know, here the way that we look at the presidents affects the way that we perceive their size and power.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's an amazing photo.
An absolutely incredible photo. Yeah.
So that makes me wonder if it was on purpose, because you would think that they would have really studied it before they made it public. Like, oh, that's kind of weird. I wonder what kind of feedback we'll get with this teeny tiny, you know, people in the picture. But maybe there is a point behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am curious to hear a little bit about your cover. I just want to pull it up because it's so cool. I think it's a great cover. Do you want to talk a little bit about who designed it or that process?
No, it was done by Danilo Thomas, who's who was my editor and is the managing editor, I believe, of Baobab Press, and it was really a kind of like wonderful. I mean, the obvious read of it, right, is that it's the idea of the wolf in sheep's clothing, right, and maybe that it gets to that duality of, you know, the president is either, you know, we read them as either good or bad, broadly speaking. And so with my first book, like there was a kind of cover development process where we went through a few drafts of it, but this one, like he sent me this and I was like, that is perfect, thank you. So it was, yeah, I really, really love it. And it gets at, I think, the heart of the book in a very visual way, right away, because there's a human being underneath it too, right? That there are there's both the sort of good and bad read, but also just the human part too. There's a really kind of great story about, this is probably involves far too much setup, but there was a kind of 19th century phenomenon of the mechanical Turk, right? Which was a sort of chess playing machine that, people would come to see it on stage, and it would be this machine that moved chess pieces and would play against, whoever your best chess player in the town was. But there was a person inside. And so Lincoln once had a visitor to the White House during the Civil War. And as they were leaving, said, well, President Lincoln, what would you like me to tell the people there? And he said, tell them there is a man inside. Right? And I like that idea. Like, I'm just human, right? I'm just doing the best I can here to try and be the leader of the country.
Did you read Lincoln's Bardo?
Oh yeah, yeah. That was what a great book, right? And
yeah,
again, a great book for that kind of humanizing, effort of the humanizing impulse.
I listened to it on audio, which was really fun because you could, there were all these different actors' voices playing the bazillion characters that he's got in there, and it was a lot of fun to hear. But yeah, very, very touching. Just different way to look at that kind of a role that a person might hold.
Yeah.
Would you like to read another excerpt?
Sure. I think since we mentioned Carter, I'll go ahead and read the Carter essay, which kind of came out of really sort of two impulses. One was I wanted to, with some presidents, the form would announce itself, right? And so the Reagan essay seemed like it would have to be a script, or the Monroe essay would be a graphic essay. But with some, I tried to figure out, like, well, what does the president do, right? What's the president's jobs? So the George Herbert Walker Bush essay is about throwing out the first pitch at baseball, but this one is about the power of the presidential pardon. It was also came out of a desire to, you always want to piggyback on success, right? And so I was thinking, well, what's the most successful book of all time? The Bible. All right, let's bring the Bible into this. So this is just called Pardon. Jimmy Carter, 39th President of the United States, 1977 to 1981, 190 years since the Constitution, 114 years since emancipation, 3 years since the resignation. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. A country built on stolen land and by stolen labor, through revolution and annexation, the hoodwinking of governments and the overthrowing of sovereign monarchies, and we still have the gall to say that our president may forgive the transgressions of citizens. These presidents, fallible men, flawed men, men who cut backroom deals, who slandered each other, who were unfaithful to their wives and their country, who are they to bestow a pardon upon the criminals of the United States? We are a nation without the divine right of royalty, which made us dangerous in infancy, chaotic in adolescence, brutal in adulthood. Original sin, we ate the apples of knowledge across this land, finding them in Plymouth, in Lexington and Concord, in the slave markets of Charleston and Richmond and New York City, at the prison camps of Andersonville and Manzanar, at Iolani Palace and Fort Robinson. The president is as fallible as any of us, worse maybe if he thirsts for power. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But he, a peanut farmer, Jefferson's dream, he may be different. In his Georgia county, he was the only white man who did not join the Concerned Citizens Council, facade of the segregationists. He is the voice of one crying in the wilderness to lead us forward. We welcome him, accept him, a chance for restoration after we have fallen so far from the balconies of the Watergate complex to the banks of the Potomac below. We look at the brokenness of America and we look to him to fix us together, to welcome us back to the fold. When he takes the oath of office, he does so on a Bible his mother gave him, open to Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of thee, but to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with thy God? He asks us if a country founded on liberty and spirituality can become what it once promised it would be. He asks if America can be a country that governs by a moral compass when it makes its decisions. Who believes that this is possible? Any inauguration, and his especially, is always a time for hope against our natures. Can we accomplish this goal? He tries. He brings Egypt and Israel together at Camp David. He returns Panama its own canal. He sets what will become the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum into motion. He negotiates with his Soviet counterpart on limiting nuclear arms, signs a treaty. On his first day in office, he signs a blanket pardon for the men who fled America rather than fight in Vietnam. His predecessor had offered a conditional pardon, but Jimmy Carter knows that love and forgiveness must be offered freely. This is not a small group of prodigal sons. This is perhaps 500,000 men or more he calls home, for whom he has killed the fatted calf. These brothers of ours were dead and are alive again, lost and are now found. He tries. What can he do? Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? He holds the codes to launch the fire that would scour the planet, and he wants to do good. Impossible. How quickly are the promises of campaign and good intentions of the first 100 days pushed aside? This job murders men. This job murders men's souls. What does it profit the electorate to gain their souls but face stagflation at home and an aggressive Red Army moving abroad in Afghanistan and Cuba and who knows where else? We shall not kill. We shall not bear false witness. We shall not covet our neighbor's goods. And yet the contradiction of this country includes all these things and more. We constantly move backward as we try to move forward. Perhaps we love this country because we are naive, or because we keep envisioning what it might be, what it actually is in moments of glory and transfiguration. And so we might beg your pardon. Pardon for believing that Jefferson, a slaveholder, could write, all men are created equal. Pardon for Lincoln, who signed both the Emancipation Proclamation and the execution order for 39 Santee Sioux with the same hand. Pardon for Truman, who bombed Hiroshima and integrated the armed forces. Even pardon for Nixon, who ordered the break-in at the Watergate complex, sending us into a long spiral from which we have yet to recover. Pardon all of them. We all know what it is like to want to leave. We all know what it is like to want to come home. Of course, Carter served only a single term. He tried to make us consider the whole world, and our hearts, oh, our hearts, the ones that love power and money too much, that lust for what we do not have too often, that build walls around ourselves to block out the chances for breakthroughs and growing, frightened of what we might become in those vulnerable moments of shared humanity. Our hearts are wicked and deceitful above all.
Wow. Yeah, that's a perfect essay for Carter. I mean, he's so much more now beyond his presidency than he was considered when he was president. I love that. Is there a certain, you write in different forms throughout the book. Is there a certain form that, I don't know, you enjoyed putting together versus another, either because yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, there are a couple of essays that just took, it's always fun to work with the form because then you have a kind of structure to work within, right? Like, it's like having Lego bricks and having a box, you go, okay, I'm going to build something that looks like this, right? And so when you have, I did a prayer for Thomas Jefferson, right, who, a famously deist president. I did postcards for Rutherford B. Hayes. And so when you're writing those things, that's a kind of enjoyable form. I actually found that the essays I had to rewrite the most, the ones that just after I had the first full draft, the ones where I was just like, nah, this does not work, were the ones that were kind of more just loose essays more than anything. Chester Alan Arthur, of all people, took a while to get right because I had I had that kind of sense of like, okay, I want to include this thing about him, which is that there are two presidents who were took the oath of office in New York City. And George Washington is one. The very first time someone takes the oath of office, it's Washington in New York City. And you can go visit Federal Hall, and it's part of the National Park Service. And then the other is Chester Arthur. When James Garfield dies, he takes it in his townhouse on Lexington Avenue, and it's now the ground level is now this kind of amazing spice market. And that seemed like, okay, like here's a kind of amazing juxtaposition that you have this president who signed the Chinese Exclusion Act, right, the first time we'd ever barred a group of people from coming into the country, and now an international grocery is in his building, right? And that felt like, okay, that's the way into this. But it took so long to actually find the right shape of it, and to find the way into it. So those essays, the more just sort of not formless essays, but the ones that didn't have an immediate shape to them, those were harder to write, generally speaking. So the kind of fun ones were the ones where, like, okay, let's put this together and put this into a shape. As somebody who grew up in Kansas, I have I want to say a love-hate relationship with The Wizard of Oz, but it really is now just a love relationship with The Wizard of Oz. Like, it is just a kind of wonderful movie. And so I wrote the Eisenhower essay, working through Eisenhower as the different characters of The Wizard of Oz, and kind of telling the story of his president, of his, really like doing a biography of Eisenhower, just with like, okay, here's the part where he's the Tin Man, here's the part where he's Dorothy, here's the part where he's, Professor Marvel. And that essay was an absolute joy to write.
So I know you couldn't include the images of your graphic essay in the book, but when you talk about the postcards, and remind me again, for President
Hayes.
What did you, how did you get to writing those? Did you, because we probably can't see what's on the opposite side of the postcard, or?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The postcards are real, actually. So I mentioned this in the acknowledgements section of the book, but I have a very patient wife who, you could probably get most spouses to, go to Mount Vernon or Monticello, like, oh, these are important presidents. But my wife was like, yeah, we can stop at Rutherford B. Hayes's house. And then, yeah, we can stop at Rutherford B. Hayes's house again. And so we were actually there. And when I went into the gift shop, I don't know why this was the case, but they were selling sort of these batches of postcards for $1. It was like 12 postcards for $1, just in an absolutely bargain basement rate. And so I bought a couple of them, just like, yeah, let's send these out to people, and then realized like, oh, these could kind of tell a story of that. So so I used, in writing the essay, I used the little, on the back of the postcard, it'll just say, something like, oh, okay, yeah, like gun room, or sideboard with China, or Hayes Home Museum and Library, and kind of use those as the springboard for that. So that sometimes the postcard has a description, sometimes it is more kind of chance to move into a little bit of biography. So yeah, so even something like, Lucy Hayes' reception gown, even if you have no idea what that actual reception gown looks like, you still go, okay, like, I've seen inaugural gowns, right? Like, I can go with this. So.
Have you ever gone into, some of the vintage or thrift stores where they have the old postcards and they actually have people who have written on them, and somehow I love those.
Yeah.
I love taking those and thinking, there must be a story in that one too. So that's a really cool idea. Let's see. Do you have one more excerpt to read?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go ahead and read. Let's do Millard Fillmore. Nobody, that's a sentence no one ever says, right? Let's give Millard Fillmore his due. So yeah, so this essay is called, and then this was actually a pretty early essay too, because I was thinking about the idea of like anybody who is president, right? And that seems really obvious, right? But like, you win the election, you're president, like you are part of that, you're going on the placemats, right? Like when you tell people that you're working on a book about the presidents, they tend to give you, like, there's a lot of little presidential ephemera that shows up, right? Like I've got a Kennedy and Johnson campaign button on. I showed my little 3D printed Rutherford B. Hayes bust that a friend printed for me. I've got a little Herbert Hoover statue. But a friend of mine sent me this coloring book of American presidents, which was done clearly by somebody who hated every president. And just this is the Martin Van Buren drawing, right? It is the William Howard Taft essay looks, or not essay, the William Howard Taft picture, he looks like a villain who's just ordered the murder of his enemies. It's an amazing book. So, but they're all president, right? They all got to be president, and they're all part of this history. And so I was thinking about, like, even Millard Fillmore, right? Millard Fillmore was president, and we know so little about him now. So this essay is an attempt to kind of engage with that and think about the significance of that. So it's called 500 Black Ships. Millard Fillmore, 13th President of the United States, 1850 to 1853, 63 years since the Constitution, 10 years until the Emancipation, 121 years until the Resignation. You don't know him, or know him only as a shell, a funny name, a repeated pair of consonants. You know he was president, but just sometime. You're not sure when. You don't know anything he did. I'll explain. He's the first president born in the 19th century, the first born after George Washington dies. There's a significance to this, a continuity, the idea that a country is more than its founders. He's the second vice president to become president after a death. He's the last Whig president. He signs the Compromise of 1850, which adds California to the Union as a free state and organizes the land taken in the Mexican-American War into the Utah and New Mexico territories, delegating to them the decision on slavery. The Union is saved, cry the people upon the news 11 years before the war begins. It's his name on the letter from the United States that Commodore Perry carries when the Black ships sail into Tokyo Bay on the last day of March 1854. Perry turns away all the emissaries the emperor sends to the ship. He'll meet only with the emperor himself, occupant of the chrysanthemum's throne, the man descended from Emperor Jimmu, the first emperor of Japan, descended himself from the sun goddess and the storm god. This is what I hope you will remember. Wealthy men and their corporations sought to open Japan to the west, and as the president was a means to that end, these men considered Millard Fillmore the equal to a living god. His signature's lovely. Calligraphic elegance, a swash added to the top arm of the F, swirling out over the M, doubling back to meet the dot of the I. The first name waves cresting black ink a ship's path on the paper. He had the biggest library of any president up to that point. He signed his name in each book, marked its shelf number in each one. methodical, complete. In the same year that Perry opens Japan with Fillmore's signature, the painter Kano Kazunobu begins a series of scrolls, 100 total, of the 500 disciples of the Buddha, commissioned by a temple in Edo. The disciples, arhats or rakan, are capable of amazing feats. A dry river flows again. The lotus flower grows from a begging bowl. Stones rain from the sky to end conflict. The rakan fly on foxes. They travel between the 6 realms, gods and demigods, humans and animals, hell and the realm of the hungry ghosts, consuming. When an earthquake kills 7,000 people in Edo in 1855, the rakan use tiny dragons to blow out the fires, while people escape from their collapsed worlds. The hungry ghosts are reincarnations of those who have died having done evil deeds of a certain kind, those not bad enough to warrant rebirth in hell or as an animal, but bad enough to keep them from a peaceful state. Desire, greed, ignorance, these are the sins of the hungry ghosts. Kazunobu works on these paintings until his death 9 years later. He almost finishes the series. After his death, his wife and his own disciple work from his sketches for the last 10. Methodical, complete. Everything happens slowly, with the deliberation of Kazunobu making his 100 paintings. Fillmore's an accident, president only because of a hot July 4th and some cherries and some milk. By the time the black ships reach Edo and Perry demands that Fillmore's signature be presented only to the lotus flower throne, although the shogunate, and not the emperor, is the true leader of Japan at this time, he is no one again, retired to the city by the crashing water, the city of the falls. Franklin Pierce, a drunkard consumed with sorrow, takes his place. The nation Fillmore once led slides towards war, world collapsing, and he is headed toward obscurity and embarrassment. In his final notable act, he runs for the high office again on a campaign against the foreign, calling himself a know-nothing, presenting himself as against the foreigners, the invaders, who arrive not in 500 black ships, but in the ports of the East Coast. At his career's end, Fillmore is driven, like the hungry ghosts, by something that prevents him from a peaceful rest. Maybe power, maybe greed, maybe the knowledge of his former godliness. And Kazunobu's paintings, too. They are installed in the temple, survived the firebombing of Tokyo in the Second World War, although the temple is badly damaged. In 2011, the public sees the 100 scrolls for the first time, and in 2012, they travel in a reversal of Perry's ships back to Washington. The Smithsonian Institution sells out of the exhibit catalog. Once, Fillmore was a god's equal, then nothing. What sorrow that must be. Every man who is president, whether by election or by accident. Nothing can remove them from the paintings, the 45 disciples of the Constitution. They perform the amazing, but only briefly, and then they are men again. When Perry arrives, Japan is unknown, the mysterious East. And now we know more of Japan than we do of Millard Fillmore, the hungry ghost, once capable of magic, now capable of nothing. Write your name in the book, file him away on his shelf, use your method. His story's complete. A tiny dragon will blow out the flame.
That's great.
Thanks.
I'm really enjoying to hear you read your essays.
Thank you.
And it really sets you thinking, thinking about the afterward for any of the presidents, what that must have been like for so many, especially perhaps the most recent who really enjoyed the limelight.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and you can go back and see how many of them attempt a second or third act. I mean, there, so many of them, lots of them. John Quincy Adams is a representative after his presidency. Andrew Johnson's a senator afterwards. Van Buren and Fillmore run for office again, as does Teddy Roosevelt. And now, now that is the kind of fascinating question going around of like, what's Trump going to do, right? Like because he keeps trying to make these kind of inroads and making these sort of feints and gestures towards things, and yeah, like seeing how that act is going to play out is, I think, going to be absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. Wow, thank you. We're kind of getting near the end of the hour, but I've just really enjoyed hearing you read and your take on just the investigation and the inquiry into that bit of history. It's appealing to me as a writer and a storyteller because I don't know if I could get through a 600-page biography. But I enjoy that storytelling side of it, which I think is why I really enjoyed Lincoln in the Bardo too, because you get like snippets of the history, but you get this different image, and I think it's really cool that you took each one and looked at them individually and didn't just write like a big old book about the presidents and here are the facts and here are the whatnots. It makes it a lot more enjoyable. So thank you to Baobab Press for publishing it too.
Yeah, agreed.
So for the last yeah, for the last few minutes here, so you're done reading all the biographies.
Mhm.
So what are you reading now? What's next on your docket?
Well, gosh, what I'm reading now, it's the end of the semester, so I'm in that sort of like I can read whatever I want moment now, which is very exciting. So gosh, I'm reading Joseph Marshall's history of the Battle of Little Bighorn, which is actually written from a Lakota perspective, which is absolutely like an absolutely fascinating book, and really enjoying that. And then I'm reading, why am I blanking on this? Molly Keene. Molly Keene's book that her Good Intentions, which actually just got reissued by the New York Review of Books. So I'm reading that as a kind of just end of semester novel to read. So that's fun. But then, I mean, really a lot of stuff I'm reading now is the project that I'm working on is the very abstract description of it is that it is a book about American memory in the Vietnam War. And so I'm reading just a lot of government publications, and I'm ordering books from the government publishing office even, so some fairly dry military histories, just to kind of get a grip on understanding the time frame that I'm writing about, and then I'm reading a lot of just government websites and trying to negotiate, like, okay, well, like, how do I get this document? How do I find this file that I'm trying to find, and who do I need to talk to in this archive? So it's really exciting and fun. The book is much different from the first two books in the sense that, one, it is a kind of single volume rather than a collection of essays, but two, it feels more, or it requires kind of more journalistic work than I've done before in the past, right? Like usually my research method is like, let's read another book. And this is like, okay, like let's make some phone calls. Let's find some experts who know some stuff and talk to them. So yeah, so a couple of books and a lot of government stuff.
Do you have an idea of the structure of that book yet, or are you just waiting to see, once you get all of that laid in front of you,
Right.
how the pieces come together?
Well, the abstract idea is that it's about American memory in Vietnam, and the actual concrete idea is I was born in 1976, and so I was born 11 months after the fall of Saigon. My parents are baby boomers, and all my uncle, but neither my dad nor any of my four uncles went to Vietnam. They just all didn't go for whatever reasons. And so I have kind of no personal connection to Vietnam. And so what I did was I went to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in DC and just randomly picked a name off of it and thought, okay, well, what if I just find out as much as I can about this one person and track down his story of his life and his death, and even how he's remembered afterwards. And so that, I think, is the kind of main structure of the story, is almost a, I just finished reading Philippe Sands's The Rat Line, which is I think the subtitle is something like the life and exalted death of a Nazi fugitive. But it's, it's about simultaneously this high-ranking SS officer who escapes from the Allies and gets to Italy and sort of hides out in a monastery there, but also about the author's kind of search to figure out what happened to him and to do all that. So I think the structure of the book is a kind of dual. Here is the story of this guy's life, but also here is the story of me searching for the threads of this guy's life.
Kind of like a little bit of a braided. Yeah, I'm sure it is. Is it kind of like a long braided essay, sort of like running these two threads together?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, that sounds cool. It does sound difficult, but if you enjoy that research and you enjoy that process, I mean, that's
and
all you want, right?
Yeah, and it's been a really kind of fascinating project to try to assemble.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you again for giving up your time today on a Saturday. And I've got a couple of links here in case anyone wants to check out the website or check out where you can get the book. I'm looking forward to getting a copy of the book. I know of a couple of people who will really enjoy your take on that. So that'll be fun to share that with them. And this will be recorded. So once it's done, I'll send out the link to everyone. And oops, looks like my internet is about to blow. So that's a good time to end the hour, right?
Right.
But again, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you. This was really great. I appreciate it.
All right, and everybody check out hiddentimberbooks.com. We've got more readings coming up down the line. You can check out our YouTube channel as well, where this recording will be up as well as all of the others. So enjoy your afternoon, and I look forward to reading more of your books soon. Thank
Thanks.
you.